We'll have just a bit of a session with you this morning before breaking for lunch at 12 o'clock. But we also want to acknowledge MP Tom Rutherford, who's joined us. It's great to have you back in the building. And also, of course, NZ First MP and Dee Foster, who has lots of experience in local government, having previously been the Mayor of Wellington. So
lovely to be here too.
It's fantastic to have you around the table with us as well. Look, I want to acknowledge that in the gallery, we also have some councillors from Rotorua Lakes Council, Burgundy Regional Council, and a former mayor, Graham Paul, as well. So nice to have you too. So we'll just quickly get through our business items, which are apologies and then minutes, and then we'll open up and consider any work that you wish to share with us, any updates you wish to share with us. And then we would love an opportunity to ask some questions from the floor. So just by way of introduction, you'll see we have our name tags in front of us. We have Mayor Fabian Tunui from Kawerau, Mayor Victor Luca from Whakatane. We have Mayor David Moore from Portuguese. We also have Mayor James Denia from Western Bay of Plenty, and our Commissioner Chair from Tauranga and Tolly, Chairman of Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Doug Leader, and then myself, the Mayor of Rotorua. It's fantastic to have you back here in your hometown. We're going to claim that where you were born, so thank you very much for taking the time. So quickly, I'll just ask if there are any apologies today. There appear to be none, so yes, Total Mayor Chief Executive, can I please have a mover and a seconder for that? That's moved by Mayor Tunui, seconded by Commissioner Tolly. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. If you have any late items, please hold them until the end of the meeting. If there is no public business to be transferred into the open, so we'll just confirm our minutes from the previous mayoral forum on the 2nd of February. Are there any amendments to that? So on page 6 of your agenda. Thank you. That's moved by Commissioner Chair. So please have a seconded by Mayor Tunui. All those in favour, please say aye. That's carried. Thank you. So we now go back to our Honourable Minister Simeon Brown, and I'd just like to open up the floor to you to introduce yourself if you wish, and any words of wisdom from you or any updates from your relevant portfolios.
Right. Well, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. And is it turned it on? Is that better? It's better. Oh, thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great to be here at mayoral forums like this, and I do apologise again for running late. And happy if you wish for the Q&A to go a bit later if you like to allow people to have the time to be able to ask any questions. It's good to be here with my colleague Tom Rutherford and Andy Foster, and just acknowledge all of the work that you do in your communities, and acknowledge some of the challenges that you're facing, particularly as you go through your long-term plans at the moment. I know it's not easy. And there are a number of challenges at play at the moment, and in particular, when there is a change of government, that does create changes in terms of those long-term plans, and so there's a number of other changes which particularly around water and the government policy statement and transport, which obviously have come at the same time. I think it's fair to say that we share many of those same challenges at the central government level in regards to the inflation pressures that are still present in our economy that we're dealing with, having to deal with the high cost of debt, and also making sure that we are delivering the services that the public rely on. And so our priorities as government are to ensure that we are delivering value for money, delivering public services that are really important, making sure that we cut waste, and a real focus on growing the economy. Those are our priorities as government, and as we put our budget together, those are the priorities that we are certainly grappling with at this stage. In terms of my portfolios, Obviously, there's a number of areas of local government which I know will be worth discussing. I think one of the key topics will be around water. We need to have a conversation around that with the forum. We've taken a different approach from the last government in relation to water. We've repealed the last government's 10 water entities approach, put in place local water done well, which seeks to ensure that local councils take responsibility once again for delivering water infrastructure, and we also want to ensure that they have the tools available to them to be able to support that delivery. That's working together amongst like-minded councils or councils within the region, whether it's making sure that you have better access to funding and financing. There's a lot of work being done around that at the moment. We've got another piece of legislation coming in the middle of this year, which will require councils to put local water service delivery plan, which will outline how, as a council, we are intending to do that. And so that legislation comes to pass shortly. But we've outlined that what will be in that legislation a couple of months ago, because we want to ensure that councils can see where that is heading. Further legislation will come later this year, which will look at areas around particularly the economic regulation, making sure that there is value for money and that there is good asset management within the approach that councils choose to take as part of that. In terms of other local government issues, we're also doing a lot of work at the moment around the framework for city and regional deals. I know there's a lot of interest in that. We want to have a much more enabling relationship with local government, and we also want to ensure that local government has better access to the funding and financing tools to enable particularly delivery of infrastructure. And that is one of the big challenges that local government faces. So I'm working very closely with Minister of Infrastructure, Chris Bishop, in terms of putting that framework together, which we in hope to have ready for release sometime in the third quarter, as we were aiming for that to be released. And that will outline how we want to enter into those deals, what the priorities will be, and also some of those tools that we want to enable as part of that. Third issue, I know there'll be a range of views on that, but we announced our position on the issue of Māori wards. That is to effectively put the legislation back to what it was prior to 2021, but also mandating that those councils which have put in place Māori wards where there hasn't been the ability for communities to be able to petition for those referendums, they will be required to have a referendum if they decide to keep those wards in place. So that is legislation that will be coming in the next few weeks on that piece of legislation. In terms of transport, you will have seen the draft GPS and the outline of priorities that we have put in place under that. There's a short term, the GPS is a 3-year. We want to move into a 10-year plan because we actually think there needs to be longer term decision making around transport infrastructure. So the GPS, whilst it is a 3-year plan and it has very clear priorities around economic growth and productivity, improved maintenance, resilience, safety, and value for money, we are doing a lot of work at the moment about what are the long-term revenue settings that need to be put in place around how we actually pay for our road infrastructure. It can be very clear we're going to change the way we pay for our roads from how much fuel you use to actually paying per kilometre in the weight of your vehicle. It's going to be a significant change, but we need to do it because otherwise the sufficiency of that fund is only going to continue to deteriorate, and that's bad for central government and local government. But we also need to enable other tools, more use of tolling, value capture to enable road infrastructure to be built, and to unlock the ability for the private capital to be able to invest in road infrastructure as well is going to be an important part of doing that. So I guess those are probably the key portfolios which relate to local government, to the Minister of Energy, as well. If there's questions that people have around energy, happy to answer those. And I'm also the Minister of Auckland, and if anyone's interested in Auckland, I'm very happy to answer any questions about Auckland as well, but I don't think there'll be much interest around this table. But once again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and look forward to having a conversation around some of the issues that you're facing and what you wish to have on my agenda.
Thank you very much, Minister. Look, what we might do now is open up for any questions of the Minister specifically related to his portfolios. And then if there are any discussions, then we can take that afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. You talked about funding financing tools. So what will they look like? What could they tools?
Yeah. So there's a number of things we're working on, and some of them are in my space, some of them are in other ministers' areas. But we've talked about, Minister Bishop's talked about our commitment around supporting councils to supporting councils around delivering infrastructures and housing, whether that's a share of the GST new goals. That's one potential opportunity. We're talking about, we're looking at reforming the Infrastructure Funding Financing Act, which is a very challenging piece of legislation and doesn't actually support councils adequately around enabling off-balance sheet special purpose vehicles that they could do a much better job or make it a lot easier. Those are a key tool. I know Tauranga done 1, 2. Hopefully 2. That's a challenge. One of the issues, and this is where Tauranga City Council is facing this issue, is ultimately when you rely on revenues from the National Land Transport Fund, that is not a consistent source of revenues, and so making it simpler and easier, and actually question needs to be asked as well around, what role does the NLTF play in that, because ultimately that makes it challenging when you're relying on a fund where the agencies board can make independent decisions. Should councils be able to, when it comes to transport infrastructure, it makes it easier for councils to be able to do that without necessarily relying on NLTF revenues to actually make that stuff happen. So that's one. Reforming the tolling legislation. Ultimately, we've got to pay for infrastructure somehow, and people need to pay. That is an important area of reform that I'm focused on. No one likes, ultimately, everyone wants to have infrastructure, and they don't want to pay for it, but ultimately you've got to add tools which unlock that ability to be able to fund to local share. So if it's a new bridge or it's a new road, as a local, how can we unlock that tool, make it easier for councils to consider that as an option? Another would be time of use charging. So we've got a commitment to legislate the time of use charging. This might not be relevant so much in Whakatane, but it certainly is in Tauranga, and making that available to, there'll be some revenues which come from that, which then can be reinvested back into transport infrastructure. So that's, and then value capture and the role that plays is another tool. All of these have political risk involved in them, so we're not at the end of the days, these will all have they'll all lead to various conversations in our communities, but ultimately at the end of the day, someone has to pay for the infrastructure that we want to build, and we want to enable those tools to be able to give councils easier access and more ability to be able to make those decisions themselves. and also where there is new tools that need to be developed, need to develop them. And in the water space, I mean, we're working very closely with the local government funding agency around the role they can play as well to support these new CCOs. So there's a lot of work that they're doing at the moment as well, which I think is, I mean, this is the conversation that local government needs to start having, is accepting a lower credit rating for a water entity, but having that, so yes, there may be a higher interest rate for that out of the debt book, but being able to borrow a lot more money in order to make those investments. Well, off balance sheet or on balance sheet, and I think this is part of the other part of the conversation, is actually it doesn't have to be off balance sheet. The LGFA are working through options which could be multi-council controlled organisation on balance sheet, so still owned by the council, but they look at debt separately from how it's currently looked at. So there's a range of funds, there's a range of ways that this can be done. We want to give councils those choices so that councils can then make what investment which best works for them.
Just wanted to have a follow-up on that. Large-scale asset purchases, aka quantitative easing, aka printing money by the Reserve Bank, was a mechanism that was used to stimulate the economy during COVID and before. Most of that money going into the housing market. Is there any consideration being given to use that type of funding tool mechanism to build infrastructure in this country? Is it something you would consider, the government would consider?
Well, the draft GPS proposes to borrow, or not borrow, but lend to the New Zealand Transport Agency, it's $1 billion a year to Eastern transport infrastructure, and to allocate $1 billion a year of capital to help deliver infrastructure. So the government is investing significantly over and above the revenues that are being raised by motorists.
Right. So not ruled out for water either then?
In terms of water, we want to enable councils to be able to have access to those tools to be able to either borrow themselves or to borrow through a council-controlled organisation of some description. But ultimately, the government is not intending to come and simply provide money. It's ultimately about having the appropriate funding and financing tools to allow for those investments.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chair Leader.
Well, thank you, Minister, and welcome to continue the conversation you've just started regarding local water stuff. Well, part of the consideration and the wide debate plenty here is that a lot of local authorities have consents that expire in circa 26. The alignment needed between whatever the local authorities choose to do in terms of working with their colleagues or whatever needs to be aligned with the expectation in terms of renewing those consents. So can I ask you the question whether or not the government has the intention, similar to what Minister Jones announced, in terms of essentially rolling over, he rolled over the consents in terms of the marine environment. Is there an expectation or an opportunity to roll over some of those consents as we transition through the local water stuff well? And we need to think carefully about that, because whilst you can roll over the consents, what suggests to you that some of the existing conditions that prevail in those consents may well not be applicable if you were wanting to roll over those consents. So the question is there intention from the Parliament to do this? I think if there is, I think we need to have a chat about the alignment between the rolling over those consents and whatever work's taking place, or the desire of the local authorities working together in terms of, as you said, meeting the challenges of having scale, meeting the challenges of whatever the credit rating is. And just one comment in terms of, I think we're going to be careful as local authorities that you can have stuff off the balance sheet. That's fine. That just makes a difference to your balance sheet. But at the end of the day, dead stem. And ultimately, it will be the ratepayer or the beneficiary of whatever service you provide who will have to meet the cost of that debt.
Yeah, so in terms of the rolling over consents, are you talking about consents for taking water or discharging, or both?
Think about water. Just makes more sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this stage, we're not looking at simply rolling over consents because there is a need to ensure that there is improved water quality. So that's the important balance. But we are open to sensible changes to ensure that we can. We want to ensure that the investment in water infrastructure is done in the most cost-effective manner. And the reality that is some of the examples which I'm seeing is that some of the investments being made are well in excess of the standards that are required, leading to significant cost escalations, which ultimately mean that consumers have to pay more. An example would be Palmerston North with the decision they've made around the new wastewater treatment plant. It's costing, I think, around 4 times what it would be if they decided to discharge the land. That is, I don't believe, required by the regional council, but they've made that decision because they wish to, for a variety of reasons. That is adding significant cost to that project, rather than looking at what is the most cost-effective manner to discharge whilst also retaining high environmental standards. And so we need to get a balanced approach to these conversations in order to ensure that we aren't simply just loading costs beyond what's required. So that's the interest that's where I'm looking at, and that's the lens I'm looking at the regulations through. It's how can we find the most cost-effective way to address these challenges. And so Taumata Arowai will play a really important role in that, in terms of those issues. But ultimately, we also need to be looking at, okay, we need to look at what are the standards around infrastructure design, greater standardization of treatment plants. We've got a great skill in New Zealand that everyone seems to design their own thing differently from everybody else, and it just adds significant cost. And that's not a great thing in my opinion. We actually want to see far greater standardization, modular design of treatment plants, standardization around design of pipes. All of that is work that Taumata Arowai will be leading, because actually I want to find the most cost-effective solution to invest in high quality infrastructure and environmental standards. And then your second question was around the balance sheet separation, and ultimately someone has to pay, right? Well, that is true. The last government's reforms, ultimately someone would have had to pay for those under that as well. What we're saying is we want to see a plan around how, firstly, ring fencing revenues. That is a really important starting point, making sure that the funding is sufficient to pay for the management of that asset, and then pay for how that funding will invest in future demand as well, to make sure that and having that having the financing tools where you can spread those costs over a longer period of time. That's the
Thank you. Just on that point, and thank you very much for the work that has gone into play on not only ensuring that there could be a new class of financially independent council organisations. I know some of us already have CCOs in place for other services, but also identifying that range of structural or financing tools. Now, you did mention them earlier, but I just wonder, have you have you started come to any initial conclusions on what are looking like some of the most likely tools to be prioritised or implemented, or is it still early days?
Well, ultimately, the best approach will be through councils creating some form of shared CCO model in order to dilute ownership and enable some form of balance sheet separation, whether that's a weak balance sheet separation or a strong balance sheet separation. That is going to be the strongest mechanism, and so I encourage councils to be having those conversations. There's work that the LGFA is doing at the moment, which will provide a lot more clarity around that. Which once that work has been completed, we'll be able to help support councils and provide that clarity. What I'm hoping to do is be able to come with 3 or 4 options. Ultimately, it's not going to be councils will still be able to innovate, but what I'm hoping to be able to bring is 3 or 4 options which are really clear and will be providing councils that clarity as they develop their water service delivery plans, what's required, what needs to be done. That's where I'm hoping to do in the next few months.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Tolly, and then back to the end of that.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. So do you see the economic regulator then being the one who's looking at the efficiency?
And so the next piece of legislation will be later this year. That will be about implementing economic regulation. That will come to Parliament at the end of this year, go through a full select committee process, and then be passed into law by next year. And that will be about setting in place the economic regulation. We'll look at the asset management plans, price paths, making sure that the organisations that operate efficiently demonstrating that efficiency through to ratepayers. That's a really part of that. If you look at water care in Auckland, it goes on to an organisation which seems to operate relatively efficiently, etc., etc. It's actually one that's a really efficient organisation. It's got no regulation, and so you end up with it's got significant challenges around topics, which have grown significantly in recent time. We're point of having economic regulations to make sure you get the efficiency of delivery. That's right. Exactly. And I think the comparison to the electricity sector is quite useful. I mean, it's ultimately a network. It's a network of pipes rather than a network of wires. And but similar principles will apply to how that delivery can happen.
And then so you can see that working for wastewater and drinking water. What's a bit more complicated?
Yes, but ultimately the choice will be up to councils as to whether or not they have stormwater in or out. Not a primary reality of stormwater is that stormwater is in your roads, it's in your parks, it's in your reserves. You can't measure how much water goes down in stormwater pipes. All of those problems, right? So primary intent is drinking water and wastewater. We will still be looking at increased standardisation and making sure that there is councils are looking at what their management of that asset is, because there is a real need to ensure there's better management of that infrastructure, and it does have a very close correlation to development land and housing. Ultimately, water infrastructure is so closely connected to unlocking land for housing, right? But what we're saying is in terms of the entities, and it'll be up to councils to make those choices rather than saying, well, actually all 3 need to be in, because there's a significant start with the same thing.
I have a question on the last topic. Look, I just want to raise the GPS.
Yeah.
I think congratulations on the focus on maintenance.
Yes.
It's something that's been worrying us for a long period of time.
Well, I mean,
it had to be done.
I agree. I agree.
But I just wanted to just get an idea from you. So it's at the moment, all the councils are working very hard on a lot of the resources, putting a lot of resources into the regional land transport. And then that heads on down to national.
Yeah.
You say put $1 billion a year for infrastructure into NZTA, but by the time you've got your maintenance and the roads of national significance, is there going to be much left? Is there a question?
Well, the reality is, I mean, there's always more demand than there is funding, right? For funds from the National Land Transport Fund. That is just the reality, and that's why we then need to have greater use of other financing tools in our transport infrastructure investment, rather than simply relying on how much fuel people put into their cars. I mean, ultimately, that's the determining factor at the moment, is how much money is available. I mean, we're very clear around the increased maintenance being really important. Obviously, that will benefit councils, and that is a deliberate choice to ring fence it for the particular activities which are really important to maintain their asset as well, which is the drainage, resealing, the rehabilitating, which, whilst there's been more money in those maintenance activity classes, actually hasn't necessarily been going towards those activities, which are actually the bits which look after your asset condition the most. So that's a deliberate decision, because we want to see that investment going to the right places. And so there is more investment. In terms of the other activity classes which councils benefit from, local road improvements, we didn't change that activity class from what it was in the last government's draft GPS. So they're still funding it. We didn't change how much for local road improvements. And then in terms of PT services and PT infrastructure, which are the other ones that councils benefit from. PT services, we've narrowed the ranges in both of those. PT services, there's more than enough in that to continue to operate and grow services in terms of the amount that it costs to operate the network. But we've been very clear that we do expect public transport authorities to be doing a better job around the private share. Dropped off during COVID, Brown stepped in, but actually making sure that there's good fare box recovery policies in place, third-party advertising. In Auckland, I think they have 1% of the revenue for operating the public transport system in Auckland comes from advertising. If you go to London, it's 12%. So we can be doing a better job, and we should be doing a better job around actually maximising other opportunities through our public transport networks. And that means every dollar you raise from advertising is a dollar that you're not going to raise from ratepayers, users, or the taxpayer. So maximising those other opportunities is really, really important. It benefits everybody in the system. So we are narrowing the range, but there's more than that. There's more than enough to continue to fund the system. But the deliberate choice there is to make sure we get value for money. And in terms of public transport infrastructure, again, we have narrowed the range. Ultimately, we're looking for value for money out of these activity classes to make sure that the investment is going towards the key thing. That, I think many New Zealanders have seen a lot of money going to a lot of things which cost a huge amount of money, but actually don't seem to deliver outcomes in recent years. So this will put some pressure on some of the choices that are made. But ultimately, every activity class is going to be pressure on it to deliver outcomes. And that is what I think New Zealanders are going to be expecting from it. Oh, and in terms of maintenance, yes, it annoys people, but
just throw away.
No. But actually, we need to think differently about how and councils need to play their part in this as well. But how do you do maintenance more efficiently? What's the cost? Traffic management is a massive cost driver. Yes, so that the NZTA is rolling out their new code of practice. It's really important that councils look at that and ensure that that is being delivered locally. If it's not working, it needs to be changed again. So we need to drive the cost out. And it's a quarter or a third of the cost of maintenance, and or sometimes even more. I mean, Andy's he's chair of the Transport Select Committee, and they've just looked at the $490,000 speed bump. What percentage of that was made by traffic management?
It's 490,000, it's 170k of that was traffic management. And then they'd had several like that. And then they actually had a relook at how they were doing it. They actually cut out different methodologies, etc. They reduced some of a series of work, package of work, from about 2.1 to about 1.1. And just talking to some other CEs, they're saying basically 40%. And a lot of that, I think, we're going to have to look not only at traffic management, but also the requirements of work safety.
Yeah.
So that chief executives don't get put in the position of going, I'm going to cover my backside because otherwise I might end up going to jail. So there's definitely some things we can look at. And if you can do that for roads and utilities, that money that we're talking about is going to go a lot further.
I mean, we had it through Cameron Road Stage 1, and they just started with a textbook book, straight out of the NZTA's book, and they moved to a risk-based, which means you have a look at everything. It makes risk-based judgments. They cut 20%.
Huge. NZTA.
When will that code come out?
Well, it's already out. It's available for implementation, so it's already been published. But it needs to be. But ultimately, it's a code. It requires councils to adopt it, and
we'll be good. Just to say, we had that Williamson Avenue, which is the Auckland one. So Tom's on my select committee as well. We had that in front of us a couple of weeks ago. We're going to have NZTA and they'll be an export call. So we'll probably try and encourage that as much publicity around that, doing things better and smarter, how important it is as we can.
And is the code up, or is it finished?
I believe so.
We'll look at that.
The other thing is looking at the practices as well. And what it's a bit sad that it's going to be closed for longer. But the principle there is actually closure is much more efficient and cost effective. And so when you're doing works on roads where there's opportunities to get in and out quickly, obviously you've got issues around access, which is always important to manage. But getting in and out quickly, weekend Auckland Transport's thinking about super weekends, busy roads, get in, close the roads, build over a weekend, get out, so that there's more disruption over a short period of time. Well publicised, well communicated, people see the benefits right away, and so those are the type of methodologies that are going to be required in order to help get that cost effectiveness out of the system as well.
Just one other thing to add on that one. I just talked to AT the other day that they said that one of the other barriers sometimes is our district plans, which sometimes prevent working late at night. So sometimes the ability to be able to work late at night gets get in, get out, do it fast. Disruption impact is much less, and if you communicate it well, communities might go, yeah, we've actually rough rather than that, drag it out of a long period of time.
It's not just the city plan, it's the resource consent for the
yes.
Actually sets some conditions as to what you can do.
Yes.
What you can't do. And some citizens who actually read those rules really well, I think, extremely different. So we need to be careful with mindful of those resources.
Yeah.
Thank you. Luca and then Meeting.
I want to make a comment with respect to what you were talking about before about the regulatory bar. I'm so relieved to hear you say that, because I think the way we're going, we're in danger of regulating people to death. I mean that sincerely, in the sense that you can always achieve an ultimate purity of something, but you've got to go for as good as practically achievable. And by putting the regulatory bar so high, the costs are so high, and that imposes so much stress on people, financial stress, that actually there's a real risk of of health impacts, psychological and others. I mean, our suicide rate in this country is it's not great, especially when it comes to youth, and a lot of that is probably due to financial pressures. So that's just a comment, so I'm just glad to hear it. With respect to financing, so if you're ruling out direct government support via some sort of appropriation exercise, that leaves some sort of bond issuance by a local authority or group of local authorities. That all requires, investors, external or internal, will want to be, if they want to be buying these bonds, they want some sort of guarantee. So the issue, and I believe that might have been where we came unstuck, or the previous government came unstuck in terms of Crown guarantees for loans and that sort of thing. So government underwriting of any of these loans, is that on the table? To what extent can local authorities have the lender of last resort in their corner?
Well, that's where the LGFA can play a role. That's where we've been around the opportunity that it can have, because ultimately it already plays a role. Crown does, as a shareholder, it's a 20% shareholder in the LGFA, has a equity stake. And so that is the opportunity there to look at what role can they play, because ultimately one of the reasons the LGFA was set up is because every council has to have a treasury arm go and borrow money. For very small councils, that's incredibly expensive, and it's not really your core business, right? So that's the purpose, of the key purposes. Did you set that up? And when you were in government, you were in the
government itself set it up.
It was 2010, I think. It was around 2010. But effectively, that was the purpose, to be able to enable it, unlock that ability. And so it's a really important tool. But one of the conversations, because ultimately one of the benefits of the LGFA and the Crown's involvement is that councils can borrow at the parity of the Crown, which is a huge benefit. But one of the conversations that needs to be had in terms of risk is for them to play a role, to be able to offer a different type of product. Is there to be a conversation? What is the rating of that particular entity in risk? Because the Crown's not wanting to guarantee those entities, and that may mean that, for example, talk to LGFA, they say, well, the difference in a AA plus and a AA credit rating is 0.5 basis points. It will be a slightly higher interest rate, but it is a very slightly higher interest rate. And so those are the things that will need to be thought through. But ultimately, that's a conversation local government has to start thinking about, in terms of the debt that you're willing to take on and the interest rates that you're prepared to pay. There is a balance between wanting a higher debt cap and what interest rate may be for that particular debt cap.
We'll go with me, Denia, chair leader, and then me, Tunui, and we may have to start wrapping it up then. Denia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was interested in your comments around the parcel of West Hill Drinking Part and cost effectiveness apparently being primary consideration, essentially primary consideration. I'm just wondering, how do we weigh up cost effectiveness, which is of course important, with ecological or cultural outcomes, so that we uphold local rules are done well? Is there any plans for policies in that area to help us apply guidance around that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is where this is the sort of key part of this issue, right? Ultimately, cost effectiveness and what other outcomes you're trying to meet at the same time. And for instance, if your primary driver is to meet other outcomes, then the likely, the more things you're trying to, the more outcomes you're trying to meet, the more potential costs you're going to face, right? Ultimately, and so it is a balance between what is the most cost-effective solution, and then also what are the other outcomes that need to be met. Now, the reality is we need to make sure we're improving water quality in our rivers, in our lakes, in our oceans, in our harbours, right? So that's to make sure that the water that is being discharged needs to be of a high quality, high standard. But then ultimately, what are the different ways that can be, what are the different ways that can be achieved? So we're looking at what are the, if you look at in discharge to land versus discharge to water, I mean, some regional councils will have policies around some of those issues at a local level, some won't. But ultimately, when you start mandating, you have to discharge to land, that is a significant increase in cost compared to discharge to water. When you can discharge the water with a very high water quality standard, it's part of that. So we're looking at, saying, well, we're going to want to make sure the regulatory system is not overly burdensome, but also is going to make sure that there is improved water outcomes, because that's what all New Zealanders want. But we don't want to also just mandate practices which simply just add cost without actually that much more benefit. Because they're trying to be other outcomes, which in some local contexts might be the right solution, but to say that one size fits all, I don't think it's the right approach.
Thank you, Chair Leader.
Thank you, Chair. I'm encouraged by your enthusiasm to get stuff done. And at the end of the day, across a range of activities, you've got to challenge the status quo, whether it's consenting processes, noise at night in terms of, as you suggested, getting roadways done at off-peak times. Got a question regarding to the Minister of Auckland. As you well know, we are part of the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance, and I think we're going to be careful that we don't see the Minister of Auckland doesn't see Auckland in a silo in itself. There are some things that happen in Auckland, such as public transport, that are appropriate for Auckland consideration alone. But when we look at what our standard of living here is in New Zealand incorporated, it's essentially driven by our efficiency to shift all those tradeable exports and imports offshore in the quickest, most valuable manner. Consequently, Waikato, Bay of Plenty here should all be part of considerations of that trade logistics network that captures the Auckland Regional Land Transport Plan, it captures the Waikato one, it captures the Bay of Plenty one. And even the National Land Transport Plan has to have some consideration of it. That also incorporates rail. When you look at the economic activity that's occurring out of Auckland, we run the risk that commercially, that's commercial entities, are making decisions before the infrastructure decision around land transport, rail transport catches up. So you've got a gradual transition from South Auckland in terms of heavy and light manufacturing shifting into the Waikato. You've got the establishment of Sleepyhead Beds manufacturing unit at Rangiora that will drive urban development further into the Waikato. And I just think that in terms of thinking about Auckland, the Upper North Island here, we have got three ports. You've got Northland, Auckland, Tauranga. Auckland's the biggest import port. It's essentially a lot of consumables. Tauranga is the biggest export port. And that's in relation to being absolutely efficient. I mean, Tauranga doesn't have a lot of exports. The exports are driven out of Te Whanetoa, Taupo, forestry, manufactured wood products here around Rua. Koto is exactly the same. You have the Kotahi Agreement, which congregates probably most of New Zealand's exports out through the port of Tauranga. So I just think in terms of considering what you do in Auckland, you have to look at the interrelationship between the wider regions of not only the Waikato, but also the Bay of Plenty.
No, look, I totally agree with you, and you'll see, the draft GPS does talk a lot about the importance of the corridor between Whangarei through to Tauranga, and that being critically important, road and rail, and the priorities for both of those. The reality is, you look at the investment, particularly in roads and national significance, it's in the Upper North Island. Because that's where the population is, that's where the population growth is, that's where the economic growth of the nation is happening, and we need to unlock and enable it. So that is a big part of the agenda. And another area is the ports, which we are addressing. One of the challenges our ports are facing through extending the coastal area permits, proposing to extend that by 20 years. They're about consent 2026. And so we're proposing to extend those by 20 years to enable them to continue to operate, to save a lot of spent 2 years and $10,000 to get those consents in place. And Minister Bishop's doing a significant amount of work around to make it easier to get time fast track consents as part of it. I think there's in terms of fast track one-stop shop consents, I think the reality of it is it's become so hard to do anything in New Zealand, and the pendulum needs to swing back to a more common sense enabling perspective. Now we have to uphold environmental standards. We will uphold treaty settlements as part of that. It's critically important. But at the same time, we have to make decisions quickly. If the decisions are no, it's far better to get a no quickly than it is to drag something through a very long process and then get a no. And I just remember East-West Link in Auckland, it was consent. We got the consent approved back in 2017. It's been 6 years going through the courts. And now just 2 weeks ago, the Supreme Court has sent it back to the hearings again. Now, it would be better if it was going to be a no, or it was going to be, there's one thing you have to change, wouldn't it have been better to have that decision sorted back in 2017? That is 7 years wasted time, right? And so the importance of making decisions quickly, if it's a yes, it's a yes. If it's with conditions, it's a no, it's a no. Then you can move on. And the other part about it is actually it's the one-stop shop. There are so many different parts of getting a consent to be able to do things with their own individual processes, with their own appeal rights. And each time you have to go through one of those processes, it takes more time. It's not to say any of those processes aren't important, they're all important. And they all uphold particular ecological, environmental, social, cultural outcomes that are important. But again, bringing that together into one process so that it will be considered as what part of one particular process means that that decision can be made a lot quicker rather than simply extending it out over a long period of time. And again, if it's a yes, that's good. Progress then can then be made. If it's a no, that means alternatives can be considered, or there's at least certainty provided. That's the intent of what we're trying to do with fast track one-stop shop legislation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and welcome, Minister. Great to have you here in the Bay of Plenty. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I only have a community of 7,000 to look after, and it's a much broader portfolio. I've actually been sitting here trying to decide if you truly did get lost, or if you went for a quick luge up at Skyline. We would have been happy to meet you up there as well, don't we?
Yeah, no, I would have loved to have been up there. But no, I did unfortunately have the wrong address in my diary. I should have come here. I should have just walked in the doors and just looked for somebody.
Just a couple of matters for our community and maybe across the whole Bay of Plenty here. And it is under the local government portfolio that you have. Well, I've taken the time to have a coffee and a muffin this morning with MP. It really is a Ministry of Health matter regarding the fluoridation of water.
Yep.
But given the fact that the directive was issued across multiple councils all at the same time, we are having the same impact, and I've caught up with my colleagues in the sector. So there's a huge, well-organised, seemingly well-resourced group led Free New Zealand. There has been a directive received by a number of people, and look, the conversation is playing out in local communities, at local councils. For my council, there are personal threats being made. So it's some of the people who are displeased with
the lack of consultation. We're getting all sorts of acts being brought into our chamber. As Commissioner Tully has shared, some of our really passionate community members are starting to know acts inside out, and we've just spoken about the fast track approval process, or what's been pursued in the bill. We start having all this different legislation colliding with one another, and now we're having a local argument about which one is the most superior and supreme. It would be really wonderful and helpful, I understand, of all the councils that have received directives. Former Minister Nick Smith for the beautiful city of Nelson has been granted a deferral while this Ministry of Health Act versus the Bill of Rights Act has been considered. It would be really wonderful, and I have mentioned this to EP Dana Kirkpatrick, for East Coast, that if there would be consideration that deferral be granted across everybody that's impacted by this, not just by individual councils, because our councils have been fiercely attacked and approached by this well-organised group to say you are breaching my human rights and you are not allowed to poison me and my grandchildren. It's getting quite personal, as I say, for my community, there are personal threats. So that's really just an ask that you might approach your colleague and say, look, there's been a determination that this is appropriate for Nelson, but actually under the directive as a whole, let's just hold fire and see. I understand that was a High Court case back in November 23. That is still to be resolved.
I can answer some advice there.
I appreciate that. That's wonderful. Probably quicker for you than for me. The other matter is I appreciate you raising the Māori courts. And really, I attended the DIA Zoom meeting that was held. I really just wanted to get you feedback from our community, and it does lead into our consultation processes as council. So I would of course have feedback that objects to the restoration, the reversal, the walking backwards in our community. At the same time, I'm trying to go out and consult and enhance the annual plan under our transitional options. It's made it very difficult when the work that I do relies on enduring relationships, particularly for my community, 60% Māori, makes that really hard. And look, I've really considered all the considerations around this buildings and the storm return. Just thought that give some consideration to the colleagues who work with that this bill forward. That much of the work that we do, while we do have environmental considerations, that our cultural considerations are also a big part of what we do in our work. That's the feedback that we get in our community. Just a couple of things as well around the financing tools and the conversations where we're trying to find extra money we really is now. In a former life, I was trained under many ministers all at the same time, so really do understand the cost efficiencies, that there is no new money, which makes prioritisation and getting a lot more crisp and clear about what we're doing really important. So what has been explored and what's been commended earlier in the meeting, absolutely do respect that. There is just a time when we're going to have to get really clear. We can't do everything at the same time. Well, we can't do everything, and certainly there does have to be a prioritisation around that. A lot of work was done in the future for local government under the former government, absolutely, but there was an exploration. A big key part of that was our income streams and our financing tools. In the famous words of my former mayor, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but let's take the wisdom of what was explored in there, because much of what's been pursued or explored now was actually considered quite in depth by quite an independent panel at the time. There is some wisdom in there. Let's learn from that and not unnecessarily create a whole lot of work where there are some real key areas to be given some opportunity and consideration for. The maintenance, absolutely, you can only visit my piece of paradise on State Highway 34. So maintenance has been a big ticket item, and we spotted that in the recently released GPS. And just with your energy portfolio, I'm not sure if anyone's let you know, so I'm looking at you, I thought I'd let you know, in our community there's an exploration of what's planned to be $300 million project, Forester. where we're looking to explore fossil-free fuels
Correct.
as an alternative for coal. So if no one's let you know that portfolio, happy to get the landowner and the investor to help you out today.
Well, that's really helpful, and I appreciate all the comments you've made in terms of the Māori wards one. I appreciate it as a difficult conversation around that with local communities. Ultimately, we're requiring councils to have a vote on it at the next local elections if there's been a water put in place since that rule change was made without a referendum. Ultimately, if the voters in your community choose to keep the ward will stay. That is and so if that's the position that you and your council and many of the community wish to have, the government will respect the will of the voters in your community.
Thank you. So that's showing off what's our evaluation.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Thank you for allowing us to have a bit more of your time today. Very mindful of your time. So I think we'll wrap up the question session now. We'll break for lunch. You are very welcome to join us, and yourself, Andy and Tom. And if there is any discussion you wish to have with the Minister, then we'll do that then. So on behalf of the Bay of Mayoral, we thank you very much for accepting our invitation to come and talk to us. I know we gave you a bit of a briefing of some of the important things to us around the Bay of Plenty, but it's great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, Liz, I would just ask if we could please have a photo with the Minister, and we'll stand just outside the chamber room before taking the lunch. Please, cheers.